again in the news, not because it's growing stronger, but because its caliphate is on the brink of extinction and foreign-born ISIS fighters and their brides are trying to return home, including to Europe and here to the UK. President Trump also tweeted over the weekend that the United States wants these countries to take back 800 captured ISIS fighters and put them on trial. The president is threatening to release them if they're not taken back. Right now, public sympathy is being tested by pleas from ISIS brides who left of their own accord to marry a fighter and support the caliphate and all its brutal tyranny, including, of course, terrorist attacks that kill innocent people across the world. One such bride is 19-year-old Shamima Begum, who hit international headlines when she and two schoolmates left the UK for the caliphate when they were just 15. Take a listen to what she's saying now from a refugee camp in Syria to journalists who've managed to track her down.
Did you know what Islamic State were doing when you left for Syria? Because they had beheaded people, there were executions.
Yeah, I knew about those things and I was okay with it at first because, you know, I started becoming religious just before I left. You know, from what I heard, that Islamically that is all allowed.
Your family have made an appeal for you to come home. They are pleading with the British government to allow you to come home. Do you have a message for your family?
You know, just keep trying to get me back. I really don't want to stay here.
Well, this is a very, very real problem, a real issue that has to be dealt with. And joining me now is the veteran counter-extremism expert, Peter Neumann, founder of the International Center for the Study of Radicalization and Political Violence, and also Ayman Dean, a former al-Qaeda member turned spy who infiltrated the heights of the organization for British intelligence. Gentlemen, welcome both of you back to the program. At what point did you think we would have to be dealing with precisely this issue? I mean, Ayman, you know it from a very personal experience, but are you surprised that the whole ISIS take two, if you like, is unfolding right now? What to do with the foreign fighters and brides?
After every conflict, we have the same problem. In fact, after the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan ended and the fall of the communist regime in Kabul, many of the veteran volunteers of the Afghan jihad returned back home. And they started a campaign of terrorism in many countries, including Algeria and Egypt. And as a result, basically, this is not a new phenomenon. But at the time, there weren't many Europeans. Now we have Europeans.
Well, that's the case, right, Peter Neumann? And you study here at the university, and you've set up this center, and you really watch this quite a lot. That makes a big difference, I guess, to us, because we're in Europe and we've seen this spate of terrorism in Europe for the last several years.
So it's been the most significant mobilization of jihadist foreign fighters that has ever happened. It's estimated that between 5,000 and 6,000 Western Europeans have gone to Syria and Iraq. And of course, going back to your question, they've not only been returning since recently, they've been returning for years. So for example, British government estimates that already 400 are back in the country. So when President Trump tweeted this weekend, it wasn't him causing this situation. He was prompting or addressing something that's been happening for a number of years. And that's become more urgent now because everyone fears that this Kurdish Syrian autonomous region is going to collapse and that a lot of people that are currently in the captivity of the SDF, of the Kurds in Syria, are going to be free at some point.
So those, of course, are the US allies who are fighting ISIS on the ground. And as you say, what's to become of these people if that whole area falls apart? So let's just take it piece by piece. You said they've come back to Britain. You know very, very well, both of you, from different vantage points, how Britain has been dealing with this, historically as well. I just want to quote you the Home Secretary, Sajid Javid, who said just this week, "As Home Secretary, my priority is to ensure the safety and security of this country, and I will not let anything jeopardize that. These are not judgments to be taken based purely on emotion and empathy. We look at the facts of each case, the law and the threat to national security. So he's really reacting, Aman, to Shamima Begum, who, 19-year-old girl, she went away at 15. You could say, well, she was misguided, but she doesn't seem to be saying she was misguided, that she went willingly, that she went knowing what was going on, and that she even supported beheadings and things because she thought it was Islamically acceptable.
Well, I remember when I went to Bosnia, I was 16, and I knew what I was doing. And then at the age of 19, I pledged allegiance to Osama bin Laden and joined Al-Qaeda. And then at age 20, I realized the errors of my way, and then I left. But when I left, you can't just go back into normal life. You have to atone for your sins. You have to do something in order to undo what you've done. So I ended up basically working for the UK intelligence services. That's why when we deal with each one of them, we have to deal with each one as individual cases. Because someone asked me the question, what do you think Shamima should do? And I said, well, look, if Shamima wants the UK as a government and as a country, as people, to take a risk for her, she must take a risk for the UK. She needs to open up. She needs to provide the intelligence services with everything that happened from the day she left, or even before, when she was groomed, and who paid for her tickets, who basically received her there in Turkey, how did she move, which safe houses, which locations, which camps, and until the, before she ended up in this refugee camp.
So one of the things, I mean, you make a very good point. She needs to divulge everything she knows.
Yes.
But one of the things I assume people like yourself, government types, look for is remorse and their state of mind. She doesn't sound very remorseful except for her own current discomfort. And I'm going to play another soundbite from another clip of another interview that she did. And let's just discuss her state of mind and how you rehabilitate people like that.
Some of the kids from Manchester who were killed in the Manchester arena, you must have heard about that attack. What did you think about that?
I was shocked, but I just couldn't. I didn't know about the kids actually, but I do feel that it's wrong that innocent people did get killed. It's one thing to kill a soldier that is fighting you, it's self-defense, but to kill people like women and children, just like people, like the women and children in Baghuz that are being killed right now unjustly by the bombings. It's a two-way thing, really, because women and children are being killed back in the Islamic State right now. And it's kind of retaliation. Like, their justification was that it was retaliation, so I thought, okay, that is a fair justification.
How would you assess her fitness for rehabilitation?
I think right now it's not very good. However, I want to emphasize that we need to see this in context. So from our experience, having watched a lot of these fighters going to Syria, the experience of Syria caused typically one of two reactions. Some people have become more radicalized, have become brutalized, and are utter wrecks. It's very difficult to de-radicalize them. It's not possible to de-radicalize everyone. Other people, however, have been turned off by the experience with ISIS, perhaps similar to you, and are ready to leave and to leave that experience behind, and perhaps are able to open up. So for those people who have radicalized further, absolutely they should be prosecuted and they should be locked up as long as they pose a threat to society. But those who have turned away, they should be given the opportunity to open up, and perhaps even for that evidence that they use to be used against other people who are more difficult cases. That would, in my mind, be a smart strategy of dealing with people who are British citizens and who, because of that, actually have a right to come back if they choose to do that.
So let's just make a little bit of a potential separation, if one can. She doesn't seem to be a fighter. So there's a difference between these women who rushed off because they thought they were on some romantic religious journey, and the men who may have groomed them and who actually were fighters. You could hear the baby in the background. She's just had a baby, and apparently she's had two others, but they died from inhospitable conditions several years ago. So you kind of have to make a distinction between who who is trying to come home and who isn't?
Unfortunately, unfortunately, in the case of ISIS women, we cannot make that distinction, and I tell you why. Because there has been incidents where ISIS women, even in the company of their own babies, set off suicide devices against Kurdish and Iraqi forces, and this happened in Mosul, and it happened in Tel Afar. So it's well documented. So this is why they created the condition in which you cannot trust any one of them. This is a deliberate policy by the leadership to make sure that, well, you want to escape, no one will trust you. So they have now created a condition where it's impossible to know what's in her mind except what she divulged. And the problem is everything she says indicate some sort of, deep connection with the Islamic State ideology, almost psychopathic connection. She keeps referring to it as a dawla rather than basically saying Islamic State or ISIS.
A dawla?
Which means the Islamic State in Arabic. She keeps referring to it as a dawla.
So sort of Stockholm syndrome or genuine allegiance?
It is a genuine allegiance. You don't go. This is why some people say, oh, we don't have evidence that she's a member. I say, no, there is the evidence. You don't live within the Islamic State boundaries without swearing an allegiance to the Caliph, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. So she already took that oath of allegiance. There is no question about it. She did.
It's proven, I agree with you, from a legal point of view, however, it's proven to be more difficult to prosecute women precisely because they haven't fought. And in the Netherlands, for example, they are applying an interesting principle, which really goes along the lines of what you said. They are basically saying everyone who was within that territory between 2014 and 2017, we assume that they were supporters and active supporters of Islamic State, and they can be punished accordingly.
So I started by saying President Trump had threatened to release these people if the Netherlands, Britain, France, Germany, Belgium didn't take them back and put them on trial. Over the weekend, the German foreign minister said it's certainly not as easy as they think in America. What is the answer? I mean, is Trump just saying what may happen anyway if this place where the Kurdish, the Syrian Kurds collapses, the YPG, the SDF, and they can't hold them anymore? Is he just sort of, is he talking about what's obviously going to happen?
Personally, I think, well, it's happening because Trump is withdrawing from Syria. And everyone assumes, all the experts assume, that without the American support, the Kurdish autonomous region will not be strong enough to survive. And so I personally think we have a window of about 12 months to bring these people back. So my
Why do you think 12 months?
Well, because Trump said March, April, he wants the last American troops to be out. I think the Kurds can survive for about 8 months against the Turks. But of course, their priority will be to fight against the Turkish, not necessarily to keep ISIS fighters from countries who they don't even care about.
And who betrayed them, by the way.
Absolutely. And so within 12 months, I do think most European countries will have to successively bring some of these people back unless they want them to be uncontrolled across the region, perhaps even smuggling themselves back into European countries. So my recommendation would be bring them back successively, start with the easy cases, use the evidence that they provide you with in court against the more difficult cases. So a sort of chain situation.
Do you know any countries that are doing that well right now? You just said that there have been over the years some 400 who've come back to Britain.
Yes. So in Britain, surprisingly, very few people have been prosecuted, and I never quite understood why. In France, 2 weeks, the government said, we're going to bring all of our citizens back, 130 of them all at once. Yeah. I think that's a mistake because the French currently do not have the capacity to deal with so many people, including women and children, and prosecute them. I do think the best way is to bring them back successively, one by one almost.
How were you de-radicalized?
That's a very difficult question. If I knew the answer to this, well, all I can tell you is that you have to use the stick and the carrot. You have to have you have to weaponize kindness on one hand, and you have to have a strong deterrence on the other. For the easy cases, for those who cooperate, you use leniency and heavy monitoring. For those who don't cooperate, it's a very radical problem that requires a radical out-of-the-box solution, which means you build an offshore facility in an island that is yours, legally, and you put them there far away from the general population. Because nothing that a jihadist fear more than anything than isolation, far away from the general population. So that is how you deal with it. One hand, those who cooperate admitted back to society on stages. Those who do not, the hardcore cases, you put them on an island somewhere.
But is that sort of a Guantanamo-like thing?
No, not a Guantanamo. I said, that is legally your jurisdiction. So, basically the UK will have lots of, islands around the world, basically, that is, governed by UK rules and regulations. But you build a facility there because basically this is, a different kind of threat. The problem is they are not your usual criminals where if you put them into prison, they know the errors of their way and or they are punished. These people, if Shamima, for example, come back and she is put into prison, what she will do? She will create 20 other Shamimas.
Well, that's what I was going to say, because prison is a radicalizing environment in and of itself.
That's the point I wanted to make. There's some country, Austria doesn't have any islands, so that wouldn't be possible. But you're absolutely right to raise the point about prisons. Because one thing is to prepare to get people prosecuted and convicted. The second step is to think about prisons. Do we have the capacity? How do we prevent people from radicalizing other people within prisons? And then the third step is to think about prevention and rehabilitation for those cases where we think that is appropriate. And one thing we haven't thought about enough is most of these rehabilitation programs are for young men. And we now expect a lot of women to come back. We do expect also very young people to come back who are both victims and potential perpetrators, both at the same time. And that requires a lot of psychological effort.
But I am very much opposed to any rehabilitation or de-radicalization to anyone who refuses to cooperate in terms of information. The first path to rehabilitation and to come to terms with what you've done is to divulge every piece of information.
That should be part of the deal.
Absolutely. You said that at the beginning. Just want to play just another clip of Shamima Begum where she's talking about, why she shouldn't be held culpable for this.
Me just going there and being a housewife and just sitting at home and them taking care of me is not really in any way helping. Like, I'm not paying for their bullets. I'm not paying for them to be trained. Yeah, I will admit I was the one that made the choice. Even though I was only 15 years old, I do have, like, I could make my own decisions back there. I do have the mentality to make my own decisions, and I did leave on my own, knowing that it was a risk.
I mean, she is a little all over the place. Yes, I did it voluntarily. No, I didn't do anything to materially help them. But I guess whether she's somebody who's going to be taken to court, I don't know. But how does one build a case in Britain or France or in the Netherlands? Diane Foley, the mother of James Foley, who was brutally beheaded, throat slit, one of the first of the major victims of ISIS publicly, has said that the Beatles, who did this to him, need to be held accountable. She does not want them to be sort of left out there, wandering around. She wants them to come back and be held accountable in court so that people can see and hear what they did and they can be, punished. How does one build a case? What's the evidence?
So I think there are three sources.
I don't mean in her case because it's clear, obviously.
Three sources of evidence. One is secret intelligence information. Second point is, especially people who went early in 2014, we're still posting a lot of stuff online. There's a lot of social media that has been confiscated that can be used. And the third source, like in every criminal case, is other people who were with them. And we know that, especially with European foreign fighters who often didn't speak Arabic, they were staying with other people who spoke the same language. So you can assume that Shamima knows a lot of other English fighters and they know her. And once you get 4 or 5 of them to open up and implicate others, you can use that as evidence in court.
So I refer to the Beatles. They're the 4 major known killers and captors of the journalists and the aid workers, in ISIS. Finally, to you, Ayman, do you think that as the caliphate winds down, and it looks like it's on the brink of falling, that ISIS is going to die off? And will they still have that, you know, that sort of ability to project their terror here and there in the West?
In 2010, when it was thought that the predecessor of ISIS, the ISI, the Islamic State of Iraq, was dying or dead, you know, I made it absolutely clear to all those who would listen at that time that no, they still have the money. They still had $120 million in cash, and they were buying businesses in Iraq all over the place in order to facilitate their return. So they used to call it aggressive hibernation. Now the question is, there were between $450 to $550 million for ISIS cash in Mosul, in Raqqa. Where is it? It made it across the border into Turkey. So their cash is safe, which means that their ability to hibernate again, waiting for the right conditions to come back. And on top of that, they have a network of what you call it, the cyber caliphate. People who pledge their allegiance to them, but they are spread all over the world because they couldn't go to their territories. So they remain where they are, in their countries, in North America, in Europe, in the Middle East, waiting for the time that ISIS will return. And as long as the cash is there and the potential pool of recruits, you know, still there, I believe that ISIS will come back in some form in the future.
Ayman Dean, Peter Neumann, we couldn't have had better experts to discuss this dilemma.